The morning was quiet. The world was still asleep, but David was already awake. The alarm clock screamed at 4 a.m., and while most people would press snooze, David stood up without a second thought. The room was cold, the air was heavy, and his body begged for rest, but his mind whispered something louder. Be better. He looked in the mirror. The man staring back wasn't proud, not yet. He remembered the days when life had beaten him down, when people called him weak, slow, and lazy. He had once been overweight, depressed, and full of excuses. But deep inside, there was a fire, a small, quiet fire that refused to die. Every time someone doubted him, the fire grew stronger. David pulled on his running shoes. The soles were worn out, the laces torn, but he didn't care. He wasn't running to impress anyone. He was running to prove something, to himself. Outside, the streetlights flickered, and the cold wind hit his face. Every step he took was a battle. Every breath was pain. But David knew something. Pain is the price of progress. While others slept, he ran through the darkness. The sound of his feet hitting the pavement became a rhythm, a reminder that discipline lives where comfort dies. He didn't need motivation, he needed purpose, and his purpose was simple: to be better than yesterday. Years ago, David had been a man lost in fear. He failed at school, struggled in training, and gave up too easily. People laughed when he said he wanted to change. They said, You can't do it." Those words cut deep, but he used them as fuel. He realized that no one was coming to save him. No miracle was waiting. It was all up to him. The only way to win was to stop being a victim and start being a fighter. One cold morning, after a long, painful run, David collapsed on the floor. His heart raced, his lungs burned, and sweat poured like rain. He stared at the ceiling and thought, "Why am I doing this? Why keep pushing when it hurts so much?" And then a voice inside whispered, "Because you've been weak for too long." That voice became his guide. It wasn't kind. It wasn't gentle. But it was real. It told him the truth no one else dared to say. You are the problem, and you are the solution. From that moment, David stopped blaming others. He stopped making excuses. Every day he challenged his limits. When his legs hurt, he ran more. When his body wanted rest, he worked harder. When fear tried to stop him, he moved anyway. He discovered that growth happens in the place where pain begins. People started noticing the change. Friends who once doubted him were shocked. "How do you keep going?" they asked. David smiled and said, "Because I remember who I used to be, and I never want to meet that person again." But his journey wasn't just about running or training. It was about conquering the mind. He realized the human mind is the strongest weapon, but only if you train it. He learned that comfort kills potential. Most people stop when they're tired. But he pushed past that, discovering that the body gives up long before the mind truly does. He started keeping a small notebook. Every night, he wrote 3 words at the top of the page: Be better today. It became his daily mission. No matter what happened, no matter how tired or broken he felt, he would do something, just one thing, that made him better than he was yesterday. There were days when he felt like quitting, when the rain poured, when his knees hurt, when his body screamed to stop. But then he would remember the old version of himself, the man who gave up, who hid behind fear. That memory burned inside him like fire, and he would whisper to himself, "Not today, not anymore." Slowly, his life began to change. The same man who once couldn't run a mile was now running 50. The one who was afraid to try was now inspiring others to never give up. But deep down, David knew this was only the beginning. Because being better isn't a destination. It's a decision you make every single day. As the sun began to rise, David reached the top of a hill. Sweat covered his body, but his heart felt light. He looked at the sky, smiled, and said softly, "This is who I am now." And in that quiet moment, one truth echoed in his mind. You don't need to be the best, you just need to be better than you were yesterday. When you decide to be better, no one can stop you. Not pain, not fear, not doubt. Because the moment you choose growth over comfort, that's when your real life begins. The sun had risen and the world was awake. David's run was over, but his real battle had just begun. The battle inside his own mind. He stood in front of the mirror, face tired, body sore, but his eyes were sharp. He saw the reflection of a man trying to build himself every single day. Yet behind that reflection a voice whispered, "You're not enough." That voice was his enemy, the same voice that had always tried to hold him back. It reminded him of his failures, his pain, and his fears. It said things like, "You can't do this, you're too tired, you're not good enough." And every time that voice spoke, David felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. But he had learned something powerful. If you control your mind, you control your life. He remembered one night when he was completely broken. His body had reached its limit after endless days of running, training, and working. His feet were bleeding, his muscles screaming. He wanted to quit. He wanted to rest. But as he lay on the floor, his thoughts began to fight. Half of his mind said, "Stop. You've done enough." The other half said, "If you stop now, you'll regret it forever." He closed his eyes, breathing heavily, sweat running down his face. He could hear his heartbeat thumping in his ears. And then, through the pain, he smiled. Because he knew this was the moment that separated the weak from the strong. He stood up slowly and said to himself, "I'm not done yet." That night he learned that the human mind gives up long before the body does. When your body says you can't, your mind must say you can. That's how real strength is built. David started calling this battle the war within. Every morning, the war began again. It wasn't against other people. It wasn't against time or pain. It was against that lazy, nagging voice that tried to control him, the voice that said, "It's okay to skip today." But David knew that every time you listen to that voice, you lose a piece of your potential. So he trained himself to talk back. When his mind said, "You can't," he answered, "Watch me." When his mind said, "You're too tired," he replied, "Then we'll do it tired." It wasn't about being superhuman. It was about being mentally unbreakable. One day, during a long-distance race, David's body started to shut down. His legs felt like stone, his vision blurred. People around him were quitting, dropping out one by one. But he refused to stop. He told himself, "This is just the pain talking. It's not real. My body is fine. My mind decides when I stop." Every step was agony, but every step also made him stronger. He discovered that on the other side of pain is power, and most people never see it because they quit too early. After finishing the race, he sat on the ground, tears mixing with sweat. He wasn't crying because of pain. He was crying because he had finally proved to himself that he was in control. He whispered, "The mind is the most powerful weapon you have. Train it every day." From that day on, his mornings became harder, but his mind became sharper. He started waking up earlier, running longer. He trained his thoughts like a soldier trains for war. Whenever he faced fear, he didn't run from it. He ran toward it. One morning, he wrote in his notebook, "The war will never stop. You just get stronger every time you fight it." David wanted people to understand that motivation fades, but discipline stays. Motivation is a feeling. Discipline is a choice. There were days he didn't feel like training, days he wanted to stay in bed. But discipline pushed him to move, and when he moved, everything changed. He started helping others who struggled with their own minds, telling them, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep showing up." People listened. They saw his pain, his scars, and his truth. He wasn't a hero. He was just proof that you can rebuild yourself one day at a time. Late one night, sitting alone, he thought about his past. The boy who once hated himself. The man who once gave up. He realized something powerful. That boy still lives inside me. But now, I control him. The next morning before sunrise, David stood outside again. The air was cold, his breath visible. He looked at the long, dark, endless road ahead and smiled. He whispered, "Let's go to war again." And he started running, not away from pain, but straight into it. because he knew that every run, every challenge, every fight with his own thoughts was making him stronger than yesterday. The strongest battle is not with the world, it's with your own mind. Win that war, and you can conquer anything. The road was long. The mornings were cold. The pain never stopped. But David kept going. Every day he pushed his body and his mind far beyond their limits. Yet, even the greatest warriors have moments when they fall. For weeks, David had been training for an ultramarathon, one of the hardest races in the world. 100 miles of running, pain, and pure exhaustion. No breaks, no excuses. It was the kind of challenge that broke most men. But David wanted to prove something. That the human spirit truly has no limit. The morning of the race was silent. The sky was a cold, hard gray, the air freezing. Runners gathered at the starting line, a sea of nervous energy, stretching and preparing. David stood alone, calm but fiercely focused. He looked at the long, winding road ahead and whispered to himself, "I will not quit, no matter what." The whistle blew. The race began. At first, everything felt fine. The steady rhythm of his feet matched his heartbeat. Step after step, mile after mile, he just kept moving forward. But soon his body started to fight back. By mile 50, his legs were screaming. His knees burned with every impact. His feet were bleeding inside his shoes. Each step felt like walking on fire. He stopped for just a second, looking down at his shaking hands. His body was falling apart. A voice in his mind whispered, "You've done enough. Just stop now." But deep inside, another voice, a voice he had trained for years to hear, spoke louder. "You said you'd never quit. Prove it." So, he kept running. His vision blurred. His breathing became shallow and ragged. He couldn't feel his legs anymore. The pain was so intense it felt like knives cutting deep into his muscles. By mile 70, his body completely broke down. He collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for air. Spectators rushed to help him. One man pleaded, "You need to stop. You'll get seriously hurt." But David looked up, his eyes full of fire. "No," he said softly. "I'm not done yet." He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't move. Tears welled up in his eyes. The pain was beyond anything he had ever felt. For a fleeting moment, he closed his eyes and thought about quitting. He thought about how easy it would be to just stop, to rest, to say, "I tried." But then, in that darkness, memories began to flash. His childhood, the bullying, the failures, the days when people laughed at him. He remembered the little boy who once said, "I'll never be good enough." And in that moment, something inside him snapped, not his body, but his limits. He whispered to himself, "I've been broken before, but not this time." With shaking hands, he pushed himself up. The pain didn't disappear. It became his fuel. He started walking again, one agonizing step at a time. Every step was torture, but every step was also a victory. He told himself, "This is what growth feels like. This is where the old me dies." People stared as he kept moving, limping, bleeding, but refusing to quit. Some whispered, "He's crazy." Others said, "He's unstoppable." David didn't care what they thought. He wasn't doing this for them. He was doing it for the man he used to be, the man who always gave up. By mile 90, his body was completely numb. He couldn't feel his legs. His shoes were soaked in blood. But he had only one thought left. Finish it. He started talking to himself out loud. "Come on, David. You've come too far to stop now. Keep going. Just one more mile." He laughed through the pain, almost crying, but never stopping. It was no longer a race against time. It was a race against his own weakness. Finally, after hours of unimaginable struggle, he saw the finish line. The crowd was cheering, but all he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. Every step felt like it could be his last. When he crossed that line, he didn't raise his hands in victory. He didn't smile. He simply fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. His body was destroyed, but his spirit was more alive than ever. In that moment, he realized something powerful. The body can break, but the mind is unbreakable if you refuse to let it. He sat on the ground, breathing slowly, looking up at the sky. "This pain," he whispered, "it's my proof. Proof that I'm alive. Proof that I didn't quit." That day he understood what true strength really meant. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about medals or applause. It was about facing the point where most people stop and going one step further. The next morning, his body was covered in bandages. Every muscle ached, every joint screamed in protest. But when someone asked him, "Was it worth it?" he smiled and said, "Every single second." He realized that his breaking point wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because once you reach your limit and keep going, you discover a new version of yourself, one that doesn't quit, one that doesn't fear pain, one that truly lives. Everyone has a breaking point, but the difference between the weak and the strong is this: the strong don't stop there. They rebuild themselves right after they break. The room was silent. The morning light fell softly through the window, touching the scars on his hands. His legs were still wrapped in bandages. Every movement hurt. Every breath was a reminder of the race. The pain, the blood, the exhaustion. But what stayed strongest in his mind wasn't the pain. It was the moment he refused to quit. For days, his body just wouldn't cooperate. He couldn't train. He couldn't run. But he refused to stay still. He began to rebuild. Not his body, but his mind. Sitting with a notebook on his lap, he wrote 3 words across the top: rebuild, refocus, rise. In that moment, he realized something powerful. Pain is not punishment. Pain is education. Every scar had taught him something. Every failure had built a piece of his strength. Now he decided to use all that pain as fuel, to rebuild himself from the inside out. He started by looking back at the man he used to be, lost and full of excuses. Then he looked at the man he was becoming, stronger, tougher, more focused. A quiet smile crossed his face as he whispered, "This isn't the end. This is where I start again." The first step was accepting the pain. So many of us try to run from it, to hide from the struggle. But he had learned that facing it head-on is where you find your power. He told himself, if it hurts, it means you're growing. He started training again, slowly. 1 push-up, then 2, 1 mile, then 3. Every single day, he pushed a little further. His body ached, but his mind was sharp as a razor. He wasn't chasing perfection anymore. He was chasing progress. There were those mornings when the alarm blared at 4 a.m. and his body screamed, "Stay in bed." But he got up anyway. He'd look himself in the mirror and say, "You promised yourself you'd never quit again." That promise became his unbreakable reason. He started running again, but this time it wasn't for speed or for a competition. It was for growth. Every step was a declaration. You survived your breaking point. You can survive anything. As the weeks turned into months, his strength returned. His legs healed. His heart grew stronger. But something deeper was happening. His very spirit was transforming. He was no longer just chasing success. He was chasing discipline, self-respect, and a quiet inner peace. One evening, running as the sun set, he stopped and just looked at the sky. He thought about how far he'd come, from a boy who hated himself to a man who could endure pain with a smile. He whispered, "The old me is gone. I'm reborn." He began sharing his story, with soldiers, with athletes, with students, with anyone who felt lost or broken. And they listened, because he didn't talk about being perfect. He talked about failure, about pain, and about the power of starting again. He'd tell them, "Don't be afraid of breaking. Be afraid of never rebuilding." His story started to spread. People saw him as a symbol of toughness and resilience, but he never let the fame change him. He always said, "I'm not special. I'm just someone who decided to keep going when everyone else would have stopped." He kept pushing his limits, climbing mountains, running across deserts, training through storms. Every challenge reinforced one simple truth: strength doesn't come from comfort, it comes from struggle. Sometimes fear would still creep in, the the fear of failure, the fear of more pain. But instead of hiding, he'd face it with a smile. "Fear is just a test," he'd say. "It's asking, do you really want this?" And his answer was always the same: yes. His message became crystal clear. You don't need to be the strongest or the fastest. You just need to be the one who refuses to stop. One night, recording a video, he looked straight into the camera and said, "I was broken, I was weak, but I chose to rebuild. If I can do it, you can too. You don't need a perfect life, you just need a reason strong enough to keep going." He paused, breathing deeply. Life will break you again and again, but every single time it does, you have two choices: stay down or rise stronger. The next morning, he woke up before dawn. The world was quiet. He tied his shoes, stepped outside, and began to run. The air was cold, but his heart was warm. Every breath was a reminder of his journey, from broken to rebuilt. As he ran into the rising sun, one thought grew louder and louder in his heart: be better, always. The sun rose just like any other morning. But this time something was different. David was no longer running for himself. He was running for everyone who had ever felt weak, broken, or lost. He remembered the boy he used to be, scared, insecure, and full of excuses. He remembered how he once looked in the mirror and hated what he saw. Now he wanted others to know that change is possible, if you're willing to suffer for it. One evening, he sat at his small desk, a notebook open in front of him. He wrote in bold letters, "Message to the world." After a moment of deep thought, he began to write, "You don't need to be gifted, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to decide that you will never quit." That message became his mission. Soon his story started to spread. Videos of his training went viral. People watched him running through storms, covered in sweat and determination. They saw a man who refused to stop no matter what. But David didn't want fame, he wanted impact. He wanted to shake people out of their comfort zones, out of the lies they tell themselves. When people asked him, "David, how can we be strong like you?" he would answer with a calm voice, "You already are. You just haven't met that version of yourself yet." He started speaking at schools, military bases, and community centers. When he walked onto the stage, the room would fall silent. He wasn't dressed like a hero, just simple clothes, a strong posture, and eyes that had seen both pain and victory. He always began his speeches with one question: "How many of you are living your life comfortably?" Hands would rise slowly. He'd smile and say, "Comfort is the enemy of growth. You can't find yourself sitting on a couch. You find yourself when everything hurts, and you keep moving." His words weren't polished or fancy. They were raw, real, and true. That's why people listened. He told them about running 100 miles on broken feet, about crying in pain, about facing fear every single day. But most of all, he told them what he learned from it all, that the mind is the key to freedom. One day, a young man approached him after a speech. "David," he said, "I'm broken. I failed too many times. I don't think I can change." David looked him straight in the eye and replied, "Good. Then you're exactly where you need to be. Because when you're broken, that's when you can rebuild." That message spread like wildfire. People began using his story as a reason to keep going. They started waking up earlier, training harder, believing more. They would say, "If Goggins can do it, so can I." But David never wanted people to worship him. He wanted them to fight for themselves. He'd say, "Don't be me. Be your own warrior." As his message grew, so did his responsibility. Every time he looked into a camera or stood on a stage, he knew someone out there needed hope. Someone was about to quit. And maybe, just maybe, his words could stop them. He shared his truth. You don't rise when it's easy. You rise when it's hard. You rise when everyone else would stop. That's how you become unbreakable. Late at night, he'd sit alone, thinking about his journey, the pain, the struggle, the loneliness. Sometimes he felt exhausted, but then he'd remember why he started. He'd whisper to himself, "This isn't about me anymore. This is for everyone who needs to hear the truth." One evening, after a powerful talk, a woman approached him backstage with tears in her eyes. "You saved my life," she said. "I was ready to give up, but your words gave me strength." David smiled softly and replied, "You saved yourself. I just reminded you who you are." That moment defined success for him. It wasn't about medals or fame. It was about changing lives, one story at a time. He continued to run, to train, to speak, not for glory, but to stay connected to the struggle. He knew that if he ever got too comfortable, he'd lose his edge. His motto became, "Stay hard, stay humble, stay hungry." Months passed and his message reached millions. Yet David still woke up at 4 a.m., tied his shoes, and ran into the cold morning air, alone. No matter how far he went, he knew the mission never ended. As he ran through the empty streets, his breath visible in the cold, a realization hit him. Everyone has a message inside them. Yours is written in your pain, your struggle, your story. Don't hide it. Share it. Because someone out there needs your strength to find their own. His shadow stretched long behind him as the sunrise painted the sky gold, a reminder of how far he had come and how far he was still willing to go. Be your own message. Be your own hero. Be better. The world began to listen. From small towns to bustling cities, people were waking up before the sun, running through the pre-dawn darkness, and pushing past the limits they once thought were absolute. They didn't know each other, but they all had one thing in common. They had heard a voice cut through the noise, a voice that said, "Be better." David Goggins never planned to become a symbol. He was just a man chasing discipline, a man at war with his own mind. But his message had grown far beyond him. It became a fire, a spark of pure, unyielding strength spreading through the hearts of millions. Videos of his raw, unfiltered speeches played everywhere. In gyms where weights clanked, in classrooms where young minds were taking shape, and in homes where people were looking for a change. His words echoed across the internet. Don't stop when you're tired. Stop when you're done. Suffering is the true test of life. You are in control of your story. People started calling it the Goggins mindset. It wasn't about building muscles, making money, or chasing fame. It was about something deeper, mental toughness. It was about the power to look pain, fear, and self-doubt straight in the eye and keep moving forward. One morning, David was invited to speak at a military base. Thousands of soldiers stood in formation, a sea of uniforms, their silence hanging heavy in the air. As he stepped onto the stage, he scanned the crowd. Young faces, strong bodies, but he saw uncertainty in their eyes. He smiled a rare, knowing smile. "I see warriors here," he began. "But being a warrior isn't about fighting others. It's about fighting yourself. Every single day." He told them about his darkest moments, the nights he cried alone, the crushing weight of feeling weak and broken. He didn't just talk about winning, he talked about enduring. He talked about how he took every ounce of his weakness and forged it into power. By the time he finished, the room was silent again. But this was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of reflection, of newfound strength, and of unwavering belief. After the speech, a young soldier approached him. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "your words, they changed how I see myself. I thought I was broken. Now I know I'm just not finished yet." David put a hand on his shoulder. "That's all I wanted you to see. Your story's not over." His message evolved from simple motivation into a full-blown movement. People formed accountability teams, running together, training together, and facing their fears together, all inspired by the man who once ran completely alone. Social media feeds flooded with messages. "I stayed hard today. Pushed past the pain. One step closer to being better." David watched it all unfold quietly. He never wanted the credit. He only wanted people to find their own inner power. He often said, "This isn't my story anymore, it's ours." But even as the world celebrated him, David stayed grounded. The alarm still blared at 4 a.m. He still ran into the darkness, still faced his own demons head-on, because he knew one truth above all: comfort destroys greatness. He told people, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind for people, it's what you build inside of them." One day he visited a school in an underprivileged neighborhood. The kids looked at him with eyes full of doubt. He stood before them and said, "I used to be just like you, scared, unsure, feeling invisible. But let me tell you something. Your situation doesn't define you. Your decisions do." A young boy bravely raised his hand. "What if I fail?" David smiled. "Then you learn. Then you try again. Failure is the best teacher you'll ever have." The room filled with a new kind of energy, hope. For the first time, those kids saw a real possibility, because they saw a man who came from nothing and turned his pain into undeniable purpose. That night, walking alone, he thought about how far he'd come, from running in darkness to now guiding others toward their own light. He whispered to himself, "This is the real victory." But the battle inside never truly ends. Some mornings, his mind still tries to pull him back. "You've done enough," it whispers. "Rest now." But David just shakes his head. "The mission isn't over, not until my last breath." He believed that the greatest legacy a person can leave is not money or fame, but proof. Proof that no matter how broken you start, you can rebuild yourself into something unstoppable. As the years passed, the legend of David Goggins grew. People quoted his words and lived by his mindset. But what mattered most to him wasn't their praise, it was their progress. Every time someone chose effort over excuses, he'd smile quietly and think, "That's it. That's the legacy." One evening, watching the sunset after a long, grueling run, he thought about the journey. He whispered softly, "We all have a choice, to stay the same or to be better. One day people will forget my name, they'll forget my records, but they will never forget the message, that an ordinary man decided to become extraordinary through pain, discipline, and purpose. That's the legacy. Be better. Always. Stay hard. Stay humble. Stay unbreakable." The sky was quiet. The early morning air was cool, sharp, and peaceful. I stood alone at the edge of a long road, the same kind of road I've run on for years. The same kind of road that has tested me, broken me, and built me back stronger every single time. I closed my eyes and just listened. Nothing. Just the wind and the sound of my own heartbeat. For a moment I thought about the entire journey, from the boy who once felt weak and invisible, to the man people now look to for inspiration. I smiled softly to myself and whispered, "It was all worth it." You see, I'm not running from pain anymore. I'm not fighting my demons. I'm at peace with them. I've learned that pain, fear, and doubt were never my enemies. They were my teachers. They showed me who I truly was. Every scar on my body tells a story. Every single drop of sweat carries a memory. And together, they built something no one can ever take away from me. Mental freedom. I looked up at the sky. The sun was just starting to rise, painting everything in gold. I said quietly, "This isn't about me. It never was. This was about showing others what's possible." I remembered all the people I've met along the way. The young man who found his courage, the woman who stopped giving up on herself, the kids who learned how to dream again. Each one of them carries a piece of my message, and that message has become so much bigger than my own life. I once said, "I want to die empty, with nothing left to give, nothing left to prove, because I gave it my all." And now, standing here on this road, I know I've done exactly that. But even now, the fire inside me hasn't died. I still wake up before sunrise. I still train, I still run, I still push myself. Not because I have to prove anything anymore, but because I want to stay sharp. I truly believe that life's purpose isn't to find a place to relax, but to keep growing, right until the very end. I think about all the excuses people make. It's too hard. I'm too tired. Maybe tomorrow. I just shake my head and smile. Tomorrow isn't promised, I whisper. You only have now. Make it count. As I started to run again, my footsteps echoed down the empty road. Every step was calm, steady, filled with peace and purpose. My thoughts became words. A final message, not just for me, but for everyone who will ever hear my story. You don't need to be the best. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be better than you were yesterday. The world will try to break you. People will doubt you. Life will hurt you. But you have to remember, you are stronger than anything that tries to stop you. I paused at the top of a hill and looked out. The city below was waking up, lights turning on, cars starting, people rushing to work. I know most of them will never see a sunrise like this. They'll never know the peace that comes after the pain. And I whispered, "That's why I run, to remind myself and to remind them that life is about chasing the best version of yourself every single day. If you want to change your life, stop waiting for motivation. It won't come. You have to start moving, start fighting, start doing. Motivation fades. Discipline stays. The mind is your strongest weapon, but only if you control it. If you don't master your mind will master you." A tear rolled down my cheek, not from sadness but from gratitude. Everything I am today came from the pain I refused to run from. So, wherever you are right now, if you're tired, if you feel broken, if you're scared, remember this. You are not done yet. Your story is still being written. You are capable of so much more than you can even imagine. Keep pushing. Keep fighting. Keep becoming. I reached the end of the road, stopped and turned toward the sunrise. The light touched my face and I smiled. The kind of smile that only comes from peace earned through struggle. Don't live an easy life. Live a real one. Don't wish for less pain. Wish for more strength. Don't just dream of being great. Work for it. Be better. Every day. Until the very end. Thanks for watching. If this message resonated with you, consider subscribing for more. Keep fighting.